The more that these two seem to get intertwined, what does that mean potentially for India and its counterbalancing? Because if it has a strong reliance on Russia in certain areas, but then Russia's dependent on Chinese, whatever, does that not risk India's security or interest?
So this is where Putin's Eurocentrism, he is completely Eurocentric, is fantastic for us. He tries very hard to reorient himself to China, but as we heard from several of his speeches, he seems quite clueless about Chinese history. He's a very good Europeanist, but he's pretty damn clueless about Chinese history. He actually made a remark in that interview with Tucker Carlson, remember? Oh, China's never invaded any country around it. Hell yeah, I think the Koreans and the Indians and the Vietnamese have a lot to say about that. Russia has a lot to say about that over Damansky Island and the Ussuri River conflict, right?
This is the Global Gambit.
So a lot's been going on internationally with the SEO, with China, with Trump's tariffs, and a country that is always caught in the middle of a lot of this, but does a tremendous job of maintaining its independence and autonomy, and something that we'll touch upon, as always, is India. And joining me today to go into that much more is Abhijit Iyer-Mitra, expert on defense and strategic affairs, and who is based at the think tank, the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies. Abhijit, we've had you on before. It's lovely to have you back. Thank you for joining us in this two-parter. The first part, really, I'm very fascinated, as I said before we came on air, to hear about what you take away from Modi's presence in Tajin, the sort of rapprochement that seems to be happening between China and India, at least a little bit, and obviously the new dynamics with Russia. And then in part two, I want to dive into the Indo-American relationship and trade and tariffs and so on. But what are your main takeaways from the past week and all the diplomatic flurries that we saw?
So, Modi wasn't very keen to go to Tianjin in the first place. It was more Trump's tariffs that made him go. Remember, every time India has hosted a summit, the G20, for example, Xi Jinping never came for that. So it's one of those things where he did not want to reciprocate. His hand was in many ways forced by Trump. But even there, it was a very calibrated message. We didn't go to the SCO. I don't... Oops, sorry.
Oh, that's what makes this podcast different.
So what ended up happening was he felt he was in a slightly tough place with the tariffs, but he wanted to show that, America is not indispensable. In a sense, it is, but you should never let on that America is completely indispensable. So he went to the SCO mostly for photo ops and signaling, which is exactly what he managed to achieve without trash talking America at all. So, it was just, it's like a, how do I put this? A very good courtship language where you kind of tell your partner, I have other options, but you never say you have other options. And that's what he did. We are in the SCO for one very, very good reason. Every time I ask any of the foreign ministry folks this, they keep referring me back to an episode of Yes, Prime Minister, where Sir Humphrey Appleby explains to Prime Minister Jim Hackett that they joined the EU to destroy it from within.
I'm very familiar with that scene, yeah.
And especially to keep a check on France, and that Britain's nuclear deterrent was aimed at France, at Moscow.
Not right. At Moscow, Germany.
Yeah.
No, the specific bit you're making me think of is, and it's like, and we went back so we could make a whole pig's breakfast of it, and like the French up against the Germans up against the Dutch. Oh, it's great. Yes, no, absolutely. But then in that case, why? What benefit does New Delhi have from being in the SEO to such an extent? Is it literally just about the performance, the optics, and not really anything to do with improving relations in its near abroad with China over, say, the border clashes of 2020?
Look, any organization that has both India and Pakistan in it, India is not there to improve relations at all. This, as I understand it, the tangible value of it is intelligence gathering. You want to see the body language. You want to see how people are reacting to each other, who does bilaterals, what comes out of those bilaterals, what's to gauge a sense. These things yield a lot of intelligence in the sense, for example, Kazakh President Yomart Tokayev might act differently with you in the one-to-one meeting And he might act very differently with you when Putin is present or Xi Jinping is present. That's a very, very important intelligence take back. You also see where the mood of different countries swings. Different countries come to the table with different ideas. You want to see which idea ultimately triumphs. How often does China manage to carry the day or carry the agenda? Is Russia able to do anything to water down the Chinese agenda? I'm just taking this hypothetically.
Mhm.
Are very, very important events at gauging power dynamics, at gauging diplomatic skill, etc., etc. Other than that, tangibly, the Indian establishment sees absolutely no value for SCO.
So when you mentioned actually about sort of signaling, one of the things that was obviously a big takeaway, and I think very craftily done, was the picture of, was it Modi and Putin's limo or vice versa, which was obviously what Putin did with Trump in Alaska, but they didn't have any photos of that. So is that sort of an illustration of what you mean?
That was a particularly good message of the kind of, very calibrated pas de deux that Modi was doing. Because why did they get into the car and why did that drive last 45 minutes even though the hotel was just some 5-6 minutes away? It's because they don't trust the Chinese to not listen in on the conversation. And Putin's Aureus, which is a cheap kind of a knockoff of a Rolls-Royce Phantom, was the best place to do it without any Chinese intelligence surveillance devices and things like that. So Modi in that sense was sending, I don't know what message Putin was trying to send, but Modi was sending the message, look, we're a bit pissed off with you, America, but it's not like we're getting too close to the Chinese. We certainly don't trust the Chinese. And that was a very, very important message that went out.
So when it comes to the Indo-Russo relationship, that's obviously my focus, but I'm actually going to post a video about a hypothetical of sort of if India and China were to get closer, could that be a potential detriment to Moscow? That's not possible in your regard. There's no way that any rapprochement of India and China could come at the cost of the Russian-Indian relationship.
India's entire game plan, not now, starting from British India in the 80s, has been that China and Russia should never, ever come together. Even Nehru, who was completely anti-colonialist and things like that, had the same policy. Of course, he executed it very badly. The Chinese saw through that, by the way. He used to go tell Zhou Enlai things like, why are you, Moscow is the global communist leader, but you're the Asian communist leader, Asian decolonization leader. They created the Bandung summit precisely to give China a sort of ego massage. He used to go to Moscow and tell Khrushchev different things. He used to come to Beijing and tell Zhou Enlai different things. The Russians didn't see through it. The Chinese saw through it. Given a choice between Russia and China, it doesn't matter how powerful China is. India will choose Russia any day because Russia doesn't have a border with India. We've got the luxury of no borders with Russia. We're a continental power. We see things from a continental perspective. We are not offshore balancers. And Russia and India have always demonstrated a remarkable ability to read each other and build up strategic trust in a way we've not been able to build with anyone except maybe the French and the Israelis, who again were separated by the luxury of having no borders with. With China, we tried very, very hard, and we've tried repeatedly. What we don't understand is, why is China willing to have India as an enemy on its border over some useless, irrigatable, unplowable pieces of land? We don't understand their cost-benefit analysis. It's something which we haven't understood for the last 70 years. We still don't get it. And the Chinese are mysterious as ever. There are a lot of Indians who presume to think what China thinks. I don't think China has this wonderful way of proving everybody wrong. So an Indian relationship with China can never come at the cost of Russia, because all the fundamentals, as far as we can see it with current tangents, maybe something changes. Maybe, China gets some brand new leader who's this millennial man who believes in peace and blah, blah, whatever, kumbaya. Great. Till then, nothing.
But in that case, then, isn't it problematic? Because from my understanding, well, actually, let's back up a bit. So obviously, from my understanding of Indian foreign policy, New Delhi doesn't tend to approach things with alliances. Right? You have relationships, partnerships, but you never go to that full extent. That's what we always talk about, right? But are you suggesting, therefore, that Russia is about as close as you can get? Is a sort of partner?
I don't think people realize this, but in 1971, we actually signed a treaty of partnership with the then USSR, which promised the Russians promised everything short of military intervention. But in reality, they moved several divisions close to the China border when we decided to liberate Bangladesh. Of course, we did it at a good time in winter when Tibet was completely blocked under heavy snow and bitterly cold, minus 20, minus 30 degrees Celsius. But the Russians did move divisions at that. We've had a long history of collaboration with the Russians. Now, when India tells Ukraine, we don't believe in alliances, we live our beliefs in that thing. We do believe alliances are destabilizing, which is why we never get into a formal alliance, either with the USSR or with Australia, UK, and Australia, Japan, and America on the Quad. You can have quasi-alliances, you can have alliances in being, but not de jure. India has always believed this alliance system is extremely destabilizing.
So when it comes to then the, shall we say, questionable performances of the Russian military, though, stepping out, leaving out whether or not India should be on the side of Ukraine, as many Western policymakers keep trying to pressure New Delhi to do, or India is going to remain staunchly, in its relationship with Moscow. The military performance of the Russian, it's not been great, right? And from my understanding of data, there has been a not complete shift, but a reallocation of emphasis of an uptake of French and Israeli equipment at the expense of Russian. Is that accurate? Are New Delhi conscious of Russia's military capabilities in that regard, or not so much?
Yes and no, because our systems are so siloized, there's no unified message that goes through to everybody within the system. So you'll actually have lobbies which will concoct imaginary great Russian victories and claim how the Russians are thrashing the Ukrainians every day on the battlefield. And listen, there's no shortage of YouTube analysis on how the Russians are thrashing the Ukrainians every day, right? Probably more that come up on my timeline than showing us how Ukraine's going to win the war. Excuse me. So, and remember, the Indian military is highly restricted in how much they can interact with foreign militaries. This isn't like NATO militaries, which, catch up for a drink and chat and things like that. There's all kinds of disciplinary action for unauthorized contact. And when authorized contact happens, you read from a script. There's nothing unscripted, etc., etc. The knowledge absorption is very low. You have to depend a lot on conspiracy theories and YouTube and Twitter or whatever to analyze the war from a distance. Number one. Number two, India isn't an industrialized country. 40% of our population still depends on agriculture. And what ends up happening is how do you keep Russia sated? You have to buy Russian weapons. We can't absorb Russian commodities because we don't have the industry to absorb, Russian rare earths, Russian zinc, Russian magnesium, Russian uranium, what have you, the way China can. We don't have the kind of energy generation to absorb Russian energy commodities as much as China can. That said, we absorb as much as we can and we buy Russian weapons because we want Russia to feel that they depend on us for both international sales in addition to diplomatic support. Diplomatic support of each other is meaningless unless there is some kind of interdependence. Just, the common, it's what Huntington calls substance and salience, what binds us together and what separates us from others. So what binds India and Russia together and what separates us from the Chinese? So these are the two calculations. On one hand, ignorance, and the second, the need to keep Russia engaged that bind us. The third, I had a Mercedes when I lived in Australia. In India, I had a BMW. The Mercedes used to work just fine in Australia. The mechanics were good. It used to do just fine. Roads didn't flood, etc., etc. In India, the BMW, shockingly bad maintenance. One drop of water, it'd stop in the middle of the road. Are suited to a certain economic environment. Russia is a second world country that produces second world weapons, which are more suited to a third world country like us, where maintenance schedules are lax and things like that. The maintenance requirement is much cheaper. MiG-29, you can literally throw a spanner into the engine and it'll still continue. It'll chug along and fly and things like that. With American equipment, it's much more sensitive. It needs much more intensive maintenance. Of course, the effects on the battlefield are a result of a system of systems. It isn't just, say, the F-18 flying. It's because it's networked to so many systems, it's able to affect so many things on the battlefield, which India, again, hasn't caught on to yet. So the third aspect of all of this is Russian weapons seem to suit us better. We need both quantity and quality. Russia provides us with the quantity. America and the West provide us with quality. Now, quality is very expensive. There was a US Air Force general who was asked, do you want quality or quantity? His reply was, I want great quality in great quantity. We can't afford that.
So, okay, I guess the last question or a follow-up I have on this, should we say, trilateral dynamics here is obviously, though, that Russia, in my mind and some people's minds, is increasingly dependent or interlinked with the Chinese. We can use this signing seemingly legal, binded, agreed upon Siberia 2 pipeline that will go, all the way from central Siberia through Mongolia, I think, and into northern China. So the more that these two seem to get intertwined, what does that mean potentially for India and its counterbalancing? Because if it has a strong reliance on Russia in certain areas, but then Russia's dependent on Chinese whatever, does that not risk India's security or interest?
So this is where Putin's Eurocentrism, he is completely Eurocentric, is fantastic for us. He tries very hard to reorient himself to China, but as we heard from several of his speeches, he seems quite clueless about Chinese history. He's a very good Europeanist, but he's pretty damn clueless about Chinese history. He actually made a remark in that interview with Tucker Carlson, remember? Oh, China's never invaded any country around it. Hell yeah, I think the Koreans and the Indians and the Vietnamese have a lot to say about that. Russia has a lot to say about that over Damansky Island and the Ussuri River conflict, right? Now, I don't know if he was being facetious or if he was being clueless, but that's good for us, because having that European view that China can never really work well with Russia is a good thing for us. We don't know how long it'll last, but we'll milk it for whatever it's worth for as long as we can. And we have to keep trying. We just can't give up, throw our hands up in the air and say, yabu. We have to keep trying to keep Russia away from China as best as we can. The closer Russia gets to China, the closer India will try as best as it can to provide some kind of alternative to Russia, in the hope that India will be valuable enough. By the way, we used to, for the last 12 years, at IPCS, at ORF, we went on telling the Americans. I got back from Australia to India in 2011. Since then, every time we met the Americans, we would go tell them, listen, you're pushing Russia too far. They're going to get too close to China. None of us want that. Stop this nonsense. NATO expansion is a strategic blunder if it pushes Russia into China's arms. They would keep saying, no, Abhijit, you don't understand. The Russians are too, they hate China too much. They'd show us how 4 out of 5 Russian strategic rocket units were actually on the Chinese border and not on the European border, forgetting the fact that it is easier for Russia to target America from the Pacific coast than it is from the Baltic or Black Sea coast. You look at the flight lines, they're much shorter from the Pacific. Fine. They used to keep coming up with these facetious reasons for, saying, oh, no, we can aggravate them. We can aggravate them more. Their differences are too great. And now we're in that position where we turn to them and say, well, we were right and you were wrong. And they don't want to accept that they were wrong. We've had this. We've gamed for this. Is it a losing battle? Maybe. But are we going to shy away from a losing battle without giving it all we have?
Okay. Well, that makes sense. I mean, I, for one, and I think a lot of people of a more international mind, not just Western, would agree that it's been the mistake of certain Western countries to push the Russians towards the Chinese, right? I think that was what some analysts thought was happening in these past weeks, right? You've offered a more interesting and I think accurate assessment of Modi sort of going there more to spite the Trump administration than actually a desire to sort of get closer with Beijing, so to speak. But on this point, does this not present India with sort of a two-front dilemma, if we call it that. It's spreading itself too thinly between trying to, get good engagement with Quad, but also in SEO BRICS, or is it more just this? It just turns up for the optics, and it's actually committed to one.
So we're not too committed to SEO BRICS except to keep a tab on things.
So it's more about the optics.
It's more about the optics.
Okay.
Quad is much more realistic because it's effectively an alliance in being, but not an alliance in law. It's what Henry Kissinger says about when you put out a statement saying it's not directed at any third party. The real undertone of the message is it's very much directed at a third party, and we retain the ability to do far worse if we choose to. So, it's that very calibrated message being sent to China. So Quad is actually quite important for us. Does it involve juggling? Yes. But tell me, what is the greatest test of diplomatic skill if not juggling relations between people who do not see eye to eye? We believed we had divorced. Bilateral relations were meant to be just that. They were meant to be bilateral. They weren't meant to be based on third parties. We were not going to condition our relations with America based on or Europe based on their relationship with Pakistan. And similarly, Europe and America shouldn't condition their relations with us based on what we do with Russia. That said, can I say this? Europe and America do not trust Pakistan. They have been backstabbed several times by the Pakistanis on all kinds of things, Afghanistan being the latest and most classic example, where all the terrorism was coming out of Pakistan, aided, abetted by the ISI. India and Russia, on the other hand, when we hear about European experiences with Russia, you keep hearing about backstabbing, a breach of faith, this, that, whatever. That has not been our experience with Russia. When Russia and India have a divergence, they tell us well in advance, bro, we can't go along with you with this. We're going to kind of let you down softly. And that's fine. When people tell us they're going to let us down softly in advance, when you see it coming, we're mature enough to accept that different countries have different impetuses and impulses. And we accept that because even with the French and the Israelis, we don't agree 100%. When the French decided to climb on the British bandwagon of good Taliban and bad Taliban, the British did it in a very crude way in Delhi. They came here and went around making these propaganda statements on how Taliban were wonderful people, etc., and we need to separate them. The French did not. They did a ground assessment. They handed over the classified ground assessment for us to read. They won't let us keep it, but we read it. We made notes over a few hours, and we conveyed it back to the government. I suspect we did it at the track 1.5 level. I suspect it was done at the track 1 level. France warns us. It is mature to expect in a mature relationship that the two partners will have differing interests at some points of time over certain issues. The question is, how do you manage it? With Russia, with Israel, with France, we've been able to manage it very, very, very well because we don't take this all or none approach. You're either it's me else or else, whatever. It's the French institution of the secret garden when both husband and wife are meant to have, if you're nobility, you're meant to have mistresses and paramours. And the agreement is both husband and wife know about it. You don't talk about it. And generally, the husband agrees to who the wife's lover is going to be and the wife agrees to who the husband's lover is going to be.
If you're both doing it, then it sort of cancels it out, doesn't it?
It's not polyamory, but it's kind of an open marriage, a more or less open marriage.
Okay, yeah, open relationship, but with that added.
It's kind of like you can bonk, but you can't kiss. Kissing is the red line.
Oh, I see. So it's just the lower half, but not the. Oh, wow. Okay.
Well, as long as it's sex, it's fine. It can't be love. Yeah.
We should start another podcast, Abhijit, and have you on as sort of the dating romance insights of sort of the South versus North, West versus East. What do you think could come of it in the next short to medium term if Beijing and New Delhi tried to, I don't know, just talk more constructively about trade? Let's keep it very limited in terms of any changes that might occur in the relationship. But what do you think might happen?
We've tried with them. Look, we've tried repeatedly to have meaningful dialogues with them. We never get straight answers. All we keep getting is duplicity. There's a lot of posturing and things. And, the dragon brown nosers in Delhi, they always keep talking about this in terms of, how China has a 10,000 year timeline of foreign policy that